Hello and welcome to another MOOG demo library. In today's video, we're going to be exploring Labyrinth and some of the ways that we can use Labyrinth for drum sounds. Labyrinth is particularly well suited to percussion sounds because we can separate the voice path into more of a duophonic behavior to be able to get two independent sounds, as well as use the sequencer separately to trigger those sounds so we can get something that feels more like a two-channel drum machine. So for this particular example, we're going to start by patching the noise output into the VCF input. What this patching does is it cancels the normalization between the mixer and the filter. So now in the filter path, the only thing that we're going to be hearing is the noise, and this noise tone control will still have an effect on the noise that's hitting the filter. I'm going to further separate that path by then taking the sequencer 2 trigger output and feeding that into the EG2 trig input. And I'm then going to take the EG2 output and I'm going to feed that into the cutoff input in the patch bay. So now with this patching, what I've done is made it so that EG2 is only going to get triggered by the bottom sequencer. And in the filter path, whereas EG1 is normally used for modulation of the filter on this attenuverter, now EG2 is going to replace it. So EG2 is both modulating the filter as well as the VCA on the filter path. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take EG1 and I'm going to feed that into the wave folder's VCA CV input. And so now EG1 is going to control the modulation on the wave folder as well as the VCA for the wave folder. So my voices are separated a little bit more. I'm going to be making a kick drum on channel 1, and the way that I'm going to do that is by using oscillator 1 fed into the mixer and then into the wave folder. And what I can take advantage of in the mixer is the fact that it clips. So if I want to drive my kick drum a little bit harder, I can turn it up in the mixer to get a slightly more aggressive tone. The other thing that we want to ensure is that the EG trig mix is set just to sequencer 1. And what that's going to do is make it so that EG1 only gets triggered by the top sequencer, since I've already separated EG2 out there. So now I'm going to go to my top sequencer and I'm going to put a quarter note pattern in to trigger our kick drum. I'm going to do this by hitting bit flip and then using the advance button to place gates on steps, because when I flip a bit, I'm adding a gate. So now I'm going to hit play and let's hear how it sounds. So what you should hear now is a flat sine wave giving us a faint kick drum, but I'm going to use EG1 to modulate the pitch of that oscillator to give us a little bit more of like a 909 type kick. I'm also going to play with the level and drive it a little bit. So now you can hear, if I want to, I can also use the wave folder on the kick drum, and I can play with the biasing of that wave folder to explore a bunch of different tonality for that kick. Next, while the sequencer is playing, I'm going to flip a couple of bits so that I can add my noise sound, which I'm going to be using for a snare or hi-hat type sound. I'm going to play with the noise tone and get it a little bit high passed, move some of that low end. And right now you'll notice that the filter mode is set to a full bandpass filter, so I can get a nice hi-hat out of this. If I wanted a snare drum, I can play with the tone of it to add a little bit more low end back in, but for now I'm just going to keep this pattern. So from here, there's a few things that we can do with the sequencer to add a little bit of movement to our sound. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn sequencer 1 CV range up and sequencer 2 CV range up. And now, the way the sequencer works is that anytime I add a gate into the sequencer, a random pitch or voltage is applied to that step. So I can start using some of those voltages to not necessarily change the pitch of my kick drum, but instead to control if the filter is moving or if the wave folder is moving. So let's hear how that sounds. So you can hear we get this movement that's persistent across multiple cycles, where I can hear that this step 5 is getting folded a little bit harder than step 1 and step 7. But what I can do with the corrupt knobs is make the behavior a little bit more generative so that it moves on its own and it doesn't persist across cycles in quite the same way. One thing that I want to keep in mind is that if I turn corrupt up but don't turn it past 50%, my pattern will stay the same. But the second I push corrupt beyond 50%, the pattern is going to start rewriting itself as well. But let's first just hear how it sounds if I turn it up part way. And you'll notice that the filtering and the wave folding will start moving a little bit on their own. I'm going to turn resonance on the filter up to make that effect a little bit more dramatic. So we can also use our envelopes in this case. I'll add a little bit of envelope modulation to the wave folder. And maybe negative envelope modulation on the filter. So now what we can explore is turning corrupt up beyond 50% so that the pattern starts writing itself a little bit. So let's go ahead and try that. So you can hear with corrupt all the way up, the changes are very aggressive and it's constantly changing, but if I dial that back a little bit, I can make some of the changes happen a little bit slower. And once I hear something that I like, I can turn corrupt down all the way and even go in and edit it and flip some bits. And now the other thing that I can explore is adjusting the length of each pattern independently. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make the second sequence 7 steps so that I start getting a polymetric relationship between sequencer 1 and sequencer 2. And I'm going to turn the resonance on the noise up so that I start hearing a little bit more pitch. Another thing that we can do as the sequencer plays is if we don't like where notes are sitting, we can use the bit shift control to start rotating through the patterns. Now once I hear something that I really like, I can hold the buffer button. And when I hold it, it's going to blink green eventually, and that lets me know that the pattern that I have now is stored. So if I turn my corrupt knobs back up, and I let it wander around a little bit, or maybe I turn the corrupt knobs to about 50% or a little over. Now, as it starts meandering away from the pattern, anytime I want to come back to that pattern that I stored, I can just click the buffer button. So I can let Labyrinth kind of work on its own to slowly adjust the pattern. And if I don't like where it goes, I can use the buffer button to return to something familiar. But if I do like where it goes, then I can just turn corrupt down and be able to capture that pattern and even resave it if I want to. Now, the other thing that I'm able to do is with the blend knob, I can isolate any of my sounds. And I can play with how they balance against each other. So as you can see, Labyrinth offers all sorts of fun options for exploring percussion synthesis and drum synthesis, and really is something that you can get lost in exploring patterns or creating patterns on your own, and is just a lot of fun to explore.